Origins of PlayStation. The story of PlayStation doesn't begin with Sony wanting to make a console. It begins with Sony trying not to make one. In the late 1980s, Nintendo needed a partner to help them experiment with CD-based gaming. Sony, who was mainly known for consumer electronics and audio hardware, agreed to develop a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. Ken Kutaragi, an engineer inside Sony who strongly believed in video games, led the effort. After years of development, Sony revealed the prototype, a hybrid SNES with a built-in CD drive. Internally, it was called the PlayStation, 2 words, because it was still considered an attachment, not a standalone console. But the partnership collapsed almost instantly. The very next day after Sony's announcement, Nintendo publicly announced a new collaboration with Philips instead. This blindsided Sony and caused a major internal crisis. Most Sony executives wanted to drop the project entirely, but Sony's president, Norio Oga, saw the cancellation as a direct insult. He decided that if Nintendo didn't want their technology, Sony would use it to compete against them. Kutaragi's team was given the green light to redesign the prototype into a full independent system. They focused on 3 principles. Optical discs. For far larger and cheaper games, 3D graphics hardware to match the industry's shift toward polygon. Rendering a simple development environment to encourage third-party studios. This moment, born from rejection, frustration, and determination, is what transformed the abandoned SNES add-on into what would eventually become the Sony PlayStation, released in 1994. PlayStation 1. When the PlayStation finally launched in December 1994, it wasn't just another console. It was a complete shift in what video games could be. Sony brought a machine to market that leaned fully into CD-ROMs, 3D graphics, and developer-first design, and it immediately set itself apart. Most consoles of the era still relied on cartridges, which were fast but extremely limited in storage. A typical cartridge could hold a few megabytes. A CD, by comparison, could store hundreds. This opened the door for fully voiced cutscenes, higher quality music, larger worlds, more ambitious game design. But bigger storage was only part of the appeal. The PlayStation also delivered surprisingly strong 3D rendering hardware for its time. Developers could build characters, environments, and effects that weren't possible on rival systems, which quickly pulled third-party studios towards Sony. That shift was so strong that even long-established franchises like Final Fantasy moved from Nintendo to PlayStation. This single migration signaled that Sony had become the new home for large-scale, cinematic gaming. The PlayStation also introduced memory cards, which gave players the freedom to save progress without relying on passwords or battery-backed cartridges. It seems small today, but in the mid-90s, being able to reliably save your data changed how games were designed. And Sony didn't overlook the controller, either. They designed it with 3D gameplay in mind: a more ergonomic shape, shoulder buttons for extra controls, and the now iconic face buttons: square, triangle, circle, and cross. These symbols weren't random. They were each meant to represent a type of action or function, a subtle indication of Sony's attention to detail. The PlayStation launched at $299, a strategic decision that helped it undercut some competitors, and the results were immediate. It became the first home console in history to sell over 100 million units, driven by games like Crash Bandicoot, Metal Gear, Gran Turismo Ridge Racer. And speaking of Gran Turismo, it became the best-selling game on the system, known for a level of realism that pushed the hardware to its limits. Sony later refined the system and released a smaller, redesigned model called the PS1, which kept the same capabilities but featured a cleaner, more modern aesthetic. Despite launching near the end of the PS1 lifecycle, it sold extremely well, proof of how strong the platform had become. PlayStation's debut wasn't just successful, it established the foundation for Sony to dominate the next decade of gaming. PocketStation. Before handheld gaming became mainstream for Sony, they experimented with something much smaller: the PocketStation. Released exclusively in Japan in early 1999, the PocketStation was not meant to replace the PlayStation. It was designed to extend it. At its core, it functioned as a memory card, But Sony turned it into something more ambitious, a tiny standalone gaming device. The PocketStation included a monochrome LCD screen built-in flash storage, a real-time clock infrared communication for device-to-device interaction, a small speaker for simple sound effects. It was extremely compact, small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, and weighed almost nothing. Yet it supported an impressive range of minigames that paired with full PlayStation titles. Some PS1 games would unlock PocketStation minigames when connected, letting players carry a scaled-down experience with them. The most popular of these was Dokodemo Isho, which alone sold over 1.5 million copies and helped the PocketStation gain significant traction. Even though the device never officially released outside Japan, it still managed to move over 5 million units domestically. It became a small cultural phenomenon there. Part virtual pet, part game companion, part memory card. Sony eventually discontinued PocketStation in 2002, but its concept lived on. In 2013, Sony revived it as an app for the PlayStation Vita, allowing players to relive those minigames using modern hardware. PocketStation may seem obscure today, but it represented an early experiment in connecting home consoles to portable experiences, something Sony would explore again with PSP, PS Vita, and Remote Play in later years. PlayStation 2. The PlayStation 2 launched in the year 2000, and from the moment it hit store shelves, it became clear that Sony wasn't just releasing a new console. They were setting the standard for the next generation of gaming. At launch, the PS2 cost $299, mirroring the price of the original PlayStation. But this time, Sony added something that drastically widened its appeal: the ability to play DVDs. At a time when standalone DVD players were expensive, the PS2 functioned as both a game console and a home entertainment system. For many households, it was their very first DVD player. Hardware-wise, the PS2 introduced two major upgrades. 1. Emotion Engine CPU designed specifically for real-time 3D graphics. It enabled richer worlds and more complex character models. 2. DVD storage. This leap in storage capacity gave developers far more room for larger environments, voice dialogue, and cinematic storytelling. The memory card also improved, jumping to 8 MB, which was a significant jump for the era, and supported bigger, more feature-rich save files. With stronger hardware came more ambitious games. The PS2 became the birthplace of iconic franchises like Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, and God of War. Meanwhile, existing series, Grand Theft Auto in particular, grew dramatically thanks to the PS2's increased power. GTA 3 completely reshaped open-world game design by shifting the series into full 3D and offering a living sandbox players had never experienced before. Sony also introduced new accessories that expanded gameplay possibilities, such as the iToy camera, SingStar microphones, and Buzz controllers. Some were fleeting experiments, but they showed Sony's willingness to push interactive gaming beyond traditional input devices. The PS2's controller also saw refinement. The DualShock 2 looked familiar, but it featured a lighter build, sturdier analog sticks, and most notably, pressure-sensitive buttons, which became surprisingly useful in racing games and stealth titles. Precise braking in Gran Turismo or nuanced weapon control in Metal Gear Solid 2 were early examples of what analog buttons could do. In 2004, Sony released the PS2 Slim, a dramatically streamlined redesign. It was thinner, lighter, quieter, and included a built-in Ethernet port, which made online play easier. The Slim model extended the PS2's lifespan significantly and became the version many people around the world grew up with. But the defining trait of the PS2 wasn't just hardware or accessories, it was its game library. Over 4,400 games were released for the system, more than any PlayStation console before or after. This massive catalog led to over 1.5 billion game sales, solidifying its reputation as the most successful home console ever made. With unmatched sales, groundbreaking games, impressive hardware longevity, and a library that appealed to every type of player, the PlayStation 2 didn't just win its generation, it became a historic turning point for Sony and for gaming as a whole. PSX. The PSX, released in 2003 exclusively in Japan, was one of Sony's strangest and most experimental PlayStation-branded products. Even though it shared the PlayStation name, it wasn't designed as a traditional gaming console. Instead, Sony built it as a high-end home media hub that happened to include PlayStation 2 hardware inside. At its core, the PSX combined a fully integrated digital video recorder (DVR), a built-in PlayStation 2 system, large internal storage for video and media files, support for photo, audio, and video editing. It also featured an internal broadband adapter, which allowed the PSX to support PS2 titles that required the hard drive or online functionality. This meant you could record TV shows, edit footage, browse digital media, and still play PS2 games, all from a single device. One of the PSX's biggest innovations was its user interface. It introduced Sony's XROS Media Bar, XMB, a horizontal, icon-based menu that later became the default interface for the PSP, PS3, and even certain Sony TVs. So even though the PSX didn't reach a global audience, its software design had a long-lasting influence across multiple Sony platforms. Interestingly, the PSX did not ship with a controller. Sony positioned it as a premium living room appliance first, and a gaming machine second. The idea was to attract a broader home entertainment audience, not just gamers. Despite its advanced features, the PSX struggled in Japan. Its pricing was high, software support was limited, and most consumers didn't understand whether it was a DVR, a PS2, or a media server. As a result, it never left the Japanese market and faded quietly from Sony's lineup. Still, the PSX is remembered as one of Sony's boldest experiments. A device that blended console gaming with multimedia functionality long before it became standard in later systems. PlayStation Portable (PSP). Sony entered the handheld gaming market in 2004 with the PlayStation Portable, commonly known as the PSP. It was Sony's first true attempt to bring the PlayStation experience into a portable format, and it immediately stood out from everything else on the market. Unlike Nintendo's handhelds, which leaned toward compact designs and simple graphics, the PSP aimed for a console-like experience. It featured a large widescreen display, strong 3D rendering capabilities, and multimedia features that were rare for a handheld at the time. One of the PSP's most distinctive features was its use of UMDs, Universal Media Discs. These small optical discs could store both games and full-length movies, allowing the PSP to double as a portable entertainment device. This made it especially appealing during an era when portable video playback options were limited. Connectivity was another major selling point. The PSP could link to PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3 other PSP systems, PCs through USB, and, importantly, the Internet through built-in Wi-Fi. This created a flexible ecosystem that let players transfer media, play multiplayer games, and even perform early forms of remote play. The system launched with titles that showed off its hardware strengths, such as Need for Speed, Underground Rivals, and, later, expanded into a library that included impressive portable versions of major franchises like God of War, Metal Gear Solid, and Grand Theft Auto. The PSP's best-selling title was Grand Theft Auto: Liberty City Stories, which moved more than 7.6 million copies and became a defining moment for handheld open-world games. Sony released several revisions over the system's lifespan. The PSP 2000 made the device slimmer and lighter, rearranged hardware components for better ergonomics, added USB charging, and improved the LCD brightness. The PSP 3000 refined the screen even further with higher color saturation, better contrast, and an anti-reflective coating. Sony then experimented with a digital-only approach through the PSP Go in 2009. It ditched UMDs completely and relied exclusively on the PlayStation Store, but this came with trade-offs. No backward compatibility with UMD collections, expensive memory cards, and higher overall costs for longtime PSP owners. As a result, the PSP Go was poorly received. To round out the lineup, Sony later released the PSP Street E1000, a budget-oriented model for specific regions. It removed Wi-Fi, microphones, and stereo speakers to hit a lower price point, making it ideal for casual buyers but far less capable than earlier versions. Despite its uneven experiments, the PSP was undeniably successful. With over 82 million units sold, it became one of the most popular handheld gaming devices in history, second only to Nintendo's DS line, and proved that Sony could build a portable system capable of delivering true PlayStation-style experiences on the go. PlayStation 3. The PlayStation 3, released in 2006, marked the first time Sony faced real turbulence in a console launch. After the enormous success of the PS1 and PS2, expectations were high, but the PS3 entered the market under very different circumstances. Sony pushed the hardware aggressively. The centerpiece was the Cell Broadband Engine, a unique multi-core processor co-developed with IBM and Toshiba. It delivered immense theoretical power, but it was notoriously complex. Most developers had never worked with anything like it, and many struggled to use the system's full potential. The PS3 also switched from DVD to Blu-ray, giving it enormous storage capacity for larger, more cinematic games. But this new technology came at a high cost. At launch, the PS3's price started at $499 for the 20 GB model and $599 for the 60 GB version, significantly higher than its competitors. Combined with the rising popularity of the Wii and the head start of the Xbox 360, Sony began the generation at a disadvantage. Despite the rocky start, the PS3 was built with forward-looking ideas. It included Wi-Fi connectivity, a built-in hard drive for digital storage, access to the PlayStation Network, a full online store for purchasing games, HDMI output for HD gaming. These features eventually became standard across the industry. The PS3 era produced some of the most technically ambitious games of that generation. Naughty Dog's Uncharted series quickly became a flagship franchise. Uncharted 2, Among Thieves, released in 2009, was widely praised for its cinematic presentation, its advanced animation, and groundbreaking set pieces. It earned over 300 awards and remains one of the highest-rated games of its era. Other major exclusives like The Last of Us, Killzone 2, Little Big Planet, and Infamous demonstrated what talented studios could achieve once they mastered the Cell processor. Even third-party titles hit milestone levels on PS3. Grand Theft Auto V, for example, sold 29.5 million copies on the system alone, more than all three PS3 Uncharted titles combined. Sony also redesigned the controller. The first model, the 6-axis, was the company's initial attempt at bringing motion sensing into the PlayStation ecosystem. It was wireless, had improved analog sticks, and could detect movement across 6 degrees of freedom. But it lacked one important feature: vibration feedback. To address this, Sony introduced the DualShock 3, which restored rumble support while retaining motion controls and the improved wireless design. During the height of Nintendo's Wii craze, Sony also released the PlayStation Move in 2010. It offered accurate motion tracking with a glowing orb and worked well for certain games, but it never achieved the mainstream traction Sony hoped for. Sony later released 2 major hardware revisions. The PS3 Slim, in 2009, brought a smaller, more energy-efficient design and a more affordable $299 price tag. It sold extremely well and helped the PS3 recover in the market. A few years later came the Super Slim, featuring a sliding top-loading disk drive and an even lighter, quieter design. The PS3's influence extended beyond gaming. The U.S. Air Force famously linked over 1,700 PS3 units to form a supercomputer known as the Condor Cluster, showing how powerful the Cell processor could be when used in parallel. Despite its difficult beginning, the PS3 ended up selling over 87 million units, ultimately surpassing the Xbox 360 by the end of the generation. It proved resilient, and it helped Sony refine the infrastructure, digital storefronts, online services, and controller design that would power the next decade of PlayStation. PlayStation Vita. The PlayStation Vita, released in 2011 in Japan and 2012 worldwide, was Sony's most ambitious attempt to redefine handheld gaming. Where the PSP tried to deliver a console-like experience on the go, the Vita aimed to push portable hardware far beyond what any competitor was doing at the time. Sony equipped the Vita with features that were cutting-edge for a handheld system: a vibrant 5-inch OLED touchscreen, dual analog sticks, something fans had wanted since the PSP rear touchpad for new gameplay mechanics, 6-axis motion sensors, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and optional 3G connectivity. Surprisingly strong hardware capable of console-level graphics. In many ways, it was a technical marvel. The device could run large, visually rich games like Uncharted, Golden Abyss, Killzone, Mercenary, and Gravity Rush, experiences that felt significantly closer to PlayStation 3 gaming than traditional handheld titles. Sony followed up with a second model in 2013, often called the Vita Slim. It replaced the OLED screen with an LCD panel, but improved battery life, reduced weight, and delivered a more comfortable overall feel. However, the Vita entered the market under difficult circumstances. Nintendo's 3 deciseconds dominated handheld gaming with a lower price point, strong brand identity, and a huge library of exclusive titles. The Vita, while impressive, struggled to communicate a clear identity. It wasn't a casual system like the DS, and it wasn't cheap enough to be an impulse buy. Another major obstacle was its proprietary memory cards. The Vita required expensive Sony-branded storage, which significantly raised the cost for new buyers and limited digital adoption early on. Despite these challenges, the Vita built a dedicated cult following. It became especially popular among fans of Japanese RPGs, indie titles, and visual novels. Remote play with the PlayStation 4 was another highlight, allowing players to stream PS4 games directly to the Vita, an experience that felt ahead of its time. But great hardware alone wasn't enough. Sony gradually shifted its focus away from dedicated portable devices. Developers began to pull back, first-party support thinned, and the Vita couldn't compete with the 3 deciseconds' momentum. By the time Sony officially discontinued the system in 2019, an estimated 15 million Vitas had been sold, far below Sony's expectations. Sony leadership confirmed that the company would be leaving the handheld gaming market entirely, marking the end of the portable PlayStation era. The Vita remains one of Sony's most technically impressive devices, a handheld that was arguably too powerful, too early. PlayStation TV. The PlayStation TV, released in Japan in 2013 and internationally in 2014, was one of Sony's most unusual PlayStation products. Instead of a handheld or a traditional console, Sony positioned it as a micro-console built to extend the functionality of the PlayStation ecosystem. At its core, the PlayStation TV was essentially a screenless PlayStation Vita. It contained the same internal hardware as the Vita but removed the display and physical controls. Instead, it connected directly to a television through HDMI and was operated with a DualShock 3 or DualShock 4 controller. The device could run over 100 compatible Vita titles, a variety of digital PSP games, original PlayStation PS1 classics, certain PC Engine titles, apps and media available on the PlayStation Store. However, not every Vita game worked. Any title that relied on touch controls, rear touchpad input, the front camera, or the microphone simply wasn't playable on PlayStation TV. This limited compatibility significantly reduced its appeal. PlayStation TV supported remote play, allowing players to stream PS4 gameplay to another TV cross-platform streaming for select games. Access to Sony's digital storefront for downloading titles. This made it useful as a secondary system. For example, letting players continue PS4 games in another room without moving the console itself. Despite these conveniences, the PlayStation TV struggled to gain traction. Its marketing was unclear, its game compatibility was inconsistent, and many consumers weren't sure whether it was a streaming box, a Vita replacement, or a miniature PlayStation console. With modest sales and limited software support, the device quietly faded from Sony's lineup. Even so, PlayStation TV remains an interesting chapter in Sony's history, a compact, inexpensive experiment that attempted to blend handheld gaming, streaming technology, and legacy PlayStation content into one small box. PlayStation 4. By the time the PlayStation 4 launched in 2013, Sony had learned every lesson from the PS3 era: technical complexity, high pricing, and confused messaging. The PS4 was built around one clear goal: make game development easier and give players more value from day one. Sony priced the system at $399, deliberately undercutting the Xbox One by $100. More than 1 million PS4 units were sold in the first 24 hours alone, setting a new industry record. The PS4's architecture was intentionally straightforward. Its x86-based CPU, strong GPU, and unified GDDR5 memory made it simpler for studios to optimize their games, something developers had struggled with on the PS3's cell processor. The result was more consistent performance and better-looking games early in the generation. Sony also leaned heavily into social features. The PS4 allowed instant screenshot captures, video sharing, and live streaming directly from the console through built-in software tools. These features weren't just extras. In 2014, Sony introduced PlayStation Now, a cloud-based service that lets subscribers stream older PlayStation titles directly to their system. This was Sony's first large-scale step into on-demand gaming and early groundwork for what later became part of PlayStation Plus. The PS4's library quickly became one of the strongest in PlayStation history. Major exclusives such as God of War 2018, Marvel's Spider-Man, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Uncharted 4 set new benchmarks for narrative design, world-building, and visual fidelity. God of War alone sold more than 19 million copies and earned universal acclaim for its reinvention of the franchise. Sony also entered the VR space with PlayStation VR in 2016. The headset delivered a 5.7-inch OLED display, 120 Hz refresh rate, 3D audio, accurate positional tracking. This made PSVR one of the most accessible VR platforms at the time and opened the door for immersive experiences like Astro Bot Rescue Mission and Resident Evil 7 VR. Hardware revisions followed the usual PlayStation pattern. The PS4 Slim, released in 2016, offered a smaller, quieter, and more power-efficient design at a lower price point. That same year, Sony released the PS4 Pro, the first mid-generation upgrade in PlayStation history. It added enhanced hardware that supported 4K gaming, HDR, and improved performance in PSVR titles. The controller also evolved. The DualShock 4 introduced a front touchpad, a built-in speaker, improved triggers, a textured grip, a redesigned light bar, a dedicated share button. It was considered the most comfortable and feature-rich PlayStation controller at the time. By the end of its life cycle, the PS4 had sold over 113 million units, making it one of the best-selling consoles ever and a defining platform of its generation. It delivered a clear vision, powerful hardware, accessible development tools, and games that focused on strong storytelling and cinematic presentation. The PlayStation 4 wasn't just a recovery after the PS3, it became one of Sony's most successful systems and helped set the stage for the PS5. PlayStation Classic. In 2018, Sony followed the growing trend of miniature retro consoles by releasing the PlayStation Classic, a scaled-down replica of the original 1994 PlayStation. It launched on December 3rd, exactly 24 years after the debut of the original system, with the goal of delivering a nostalgic, plug-and-play experience for modern audiences. The device came preloaded with 20 games, ranging from platformers and RPGs to racers and fighters. It included two controllers modeled after the original pre-DualShock design, meaning no analog sticks and no rumble support. The system output at modern resolutions through HDMI and featured simple save-state functionality for each title. However, reaction to the PlayStation Classic was mixed from the start. While some fans appreciated the authentic look and compact form factor, several issues held it back. The game selection left out major PlayStation staples like Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, and Gran Turismo. A number of games ran PAL versions, 50 Hz, leading to slower performance on modern 60 Hz displays. Some titles suffered from input lag and inconsistent emulation. The $99 launch price felt high compared to competing mini-consoles that offered stronger libraries or better performance. Critics pointed to these problems and felt the system didn't live up to the legacy of the original PlayStation. Many outlets describe the library as incomplete, the emulation as uneven, and the overall execution as rushed. Collectors and nostalgic fans still picked it up, but mainstream reception was tepid. The PlayStation Classic is remembered today as a well-intentioned but flawed attempt to celebrate Sony's early history. A device that had the look of the original PlayStation, but not the depth that made the 1990s PlayStation era so iconic. PlayStation 5. When the PlayStation 5 released in 2020, it marked the beginning of a new generation centered around speed, immersion, and upgraded hardware that left the PS4 era far behind. Sony launched two versions at once, a standard model with an Ultra HD Blu-ray drive, and a digital edition for players who preferred an all-download library. Both offered the same performance. The only difference was the presence of the disc slot. Under the hood, the PS5 delivered one of the biggest leaps in PlayStation history. Its custom SSD allowed for extremely fast load times, enabling developers to build worlds with minimal waiting screens and far smoother transitions. The GPU introduced hardware-accelerated ray tracing, bringing realistic reflections, lighting, and shadows into console gaming. The system supported 4K resolution at up to 120 frames per second, along with 3D audio technology powered by Sony's Tempest engine, giving games a more spatial and lifelike soundscape. The PS5 also retained backward compatibility with most PS4 titles, allowing players to carry much of their library forward from the previous generation. But one of Sony's most significant changes wasn't in the console itself, it was in the controller. The PS5 introduced the DualSense, which represented a major step beyond the DualShock line. The DualSense featured adaptive triggers with variable resistance, advanced haptic feedback for precise tactile sensations, a built-in microphone, USB-C fast charging, a redesigned two-tone aesthetic. Games like Astro's Playroom showcased how detailed these new features could feel, from simulating tension on a bowstring to recreating the sensation of walking on different surfaces. Exclusive titles demonstrated the PS5's power early on. The remake of Demon's Souls highlighted the system's graphical capabilities, while Marvel's Spider-Man, Miles Morales emphasized fast traversal, ray-traced reflections, and near-instant loading. More major games, such as God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Forbidden West, were among the system's most anticipated releases at launch and in the years following. Despite its strong debut, supply issues quickly became part of the PS5 story. A combination of pandemic-related manufacturing delays, a global semiconductor shortage, high demand, and widespread reseller activity made it difficult for many players to purchase a unit. Throughout 2021 and 2022, PS5 restocks often sold out within minutes. Even with those challenges, the system achieved rapid sales growth. By mid-2022, the PS5 had surpassed 21 million units sold, significantly outpacing the Xbox Series X and Series S. With powerful hardware, a reinvented controller, strong early exclusives, and a modernized digital ecosystem, the PlayStation 5 solidified Sony's momentum coming out of the PS4 era. It represents the most technically ambitious PlayStation yet, designed for larger worlds, faster games, and deeper immersion than any console before it. PlayStation VR2. The PlayStation VR2, announced in late 2022 and released in February 2023, marked Sony's second major push into virtual reality, this time with hardware designed specifically for the PlayStation 5. Unlike the first PSVR, which was built on PS4-era limitations, the VR2 aimed to deliver a fully modern VR experience with far greater fidelity and immersion. The headset introduced several major upgrades: dual 20x2040 OLED displays, offering sharp 4K HDR visuals, up to 120 frames per second for smoother motion eye tracking, allowing games to react to where the player is looking, inside-out tracking, removing the need for external cameras, headset vibration, adding subtle feedback during gameplay, a new, more comfortable and adjustable design. Sony also redesigned the controllers entirely. The VR2 Sense controllers included adaptive triggers, precise haptic feedback, finger touch detection, and highly accurate tracking. bringing many of the DualSense's best features into VR form. A number of major titles were built to showcase the system's capabilities. Horizon Call of the Mountain was the flagship experience, offering highly detailed environments and fluid climbing mechanics tailored to VR. Other notable games included VR versions of Resident Evil Village, No Man's Sky, and a range of smaller titles designed to take advantage of eye tracking and haptic feedback. Comfort was also a priority. The headset included a vent system for airflow, a redesigned lens adjustment dial for better clarity, and a lighter, more balanced frame compared to the original PSVR. Small quality-of-life features, such as a see-through mode that lets players view their surroundings without removing the headset, made everyday use easier. The VR2 also introduced a customizable play area that automatically maps the room and alerts players when they approach the boundaries. Overall, the PlayStation VR2 represented a significant evolution in Sony's virtual reality ambitions. With sharper displays, improved tracking, deeper controller feedback, and a streamlined user experience, it brought PS5 quality immersion to VR and showed how far PlayStation's technology had come since its first steps into the space.